Hello, everyone, and welcome to Smashing Out Cash Outs, tips to protect against your next ATM attack. My name's Steve Lazenby, and I'm the VP of Product Management at Inetco Systems, and I appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you today. Today, I'm going to focus on terminal and logical ATM cash out attacks, rather than physical attacks, and provide some thoughts on how to protect yourselves. First, I'll review a few case studies. In each, I'll review how fraudsters succeeded. And I will provide a few ideas on how you can add additional protection to detect and block ATM fraud. Following the end of my presentation, there will be a time for questions. And if you don't get your questions answered, or if you have follow-up questions, my contact information will be available. First, a brief introduction. Inetco is a global software company headquartered in beautiful Vancouver, Canada. We leverage one of the largest payment protocol decode libraries in the world to capture, correlate, and analyze ATM and payment transaction data from every channel in real time. Our real-time payment transaction data platform, Inetco Insight, is deployed by banks, processors, IADs, and retailers in over 35 countries to detect and block ATM and payment fraud, improve ATM and card channel profitability, and optimize ATM and card and payment operations. Inetco is the only vendor providing network-level fraud detection specifically for the ATM channel. All right, now to get into the details. The past few years have been extremely eventful in terms of the cybercrime threats faced by financial institutions. Things are not likely to get easier anytime soon. The COVID-19 pandemic is changing consumers' card usage and payment patterns, giving fraudsters new opportunities. ATM cash-out attacks are getting more sophisticated as well. New malware has been developed and made available for purchase on the dark web, so criminals no longer need to be a computer science expert to execute cybercrimes. Because of this, cybercriminals have been successful with new infiltration techniques, and the geography of attacks has become more extensive. And while the anticipated spike in traditional card fraud due to the huge data breaches that have happened in recent years has not yet hit, ATM attacks that immediately give money to attackers is on the increase. While the US has been less impacted to date, authorities are seeing an increase in activity as well. Attacks targeting ATMs are a question of when and not if, and it's important to be able to detect the signs early to block or at least minimize losses. So let's look at a few case studies and how the cyber criminals work. Case study 1, a major financial institution in Africa. One morning, members of the fraud group of a major bank learned that a large number of ATMs are not dispensing cash to customers. Upon further investigation, their surprise turns to horror as they realize that overnight, 100 people used forged cards to withdraw $19 million from over 1,400 ATMs in one city in under 3 hours in a massive cash-out attack. The bank did have defenses in place. The bank had transaction monitoring capabilities. Data encryption and tokenization was used to encrypt all sensitive data present in the back end. And authentication procedures for a withdrawal above a specific threshold were in place. So what happened? To better understand this, let's look at how a switch malware attack is executed. From this modern-day payment environment, we can see that bank ATMs acquire both competitor and customer transactions. Foreign terminals also acquire the bank's customer transactions. In normal circumstances, foreign terminals connect through a payment network such as Visa or MasterCard. The bank transaction switch also connects to the payment network and is able to receive remote on-us transactions or switch the off-us transactions to other financial institutions. On-us and remote on-us transactions are forwarded to the bank's authorization host for account verification and enforcement of limits. That's usually where fraud solutions monitoring the authorizations in real time or in some instances near real time, sit. Many fraud management solutions sit on the back end of the transaction, and they rely on switch or core banking system data being passed to them. The inherent vulnerabilities in this approach are the terminal handler or switch and other services strip off important contextual information to avoid the performance cost of logging all details. The problem with this is that machine learning solutions need this information in order to accurately detect fraud. But more importantly, fraud systems can't analyze data they don't receive. Now let's have a look at how the attack was executed. In this case, the criminal gang was sophisticated. They used a spear phishing email to deposit malware that gave them access to the bank's entire network. They used this access to place a malicious proxy switch on the network. In addition, they created hundreds of clone cards using information from card skimming activities. Then they went to work. Once the switch is compromised and the malware is activated, the transaction switch goes into a stand-in mode and starts to approve the fraudulent transactions. As transactions never go to the back end to be authorized, the limits on accounts are not enforced and fraud detection systems are blindsided. With fraud systems blind, an unlimited amount of attacks and withdrawals can happen without ever being detected or stopped. Transaction switches that are compromised usually sit on a PCI DSS environment, which is a network that is completely segregated from all other environments. In these types of attacks, malware is able to get past anti-malware, application layer firewalls, application whitelisting, privileged identity management, and DLP solutions. So the details sent from payment switch to authorized transactions were never forwarded to the core banking system. Instead, the request was handled by the malicious proxy switch deployed by the attackers, sending fake responses authorizing withdrawals. So how can you protect against man-in-the-middle attacks? The key is to look to detect fraud across your network, not only on the back end. It's important to independently monitor applications, services, and all network transactions, seeking to detect missing back-end transactions, which are indicative of fake processing, and unexpected stand-in modes and fallbacks, all indicative of man-in-the-middle attacks. Also look for high volume or unusual repeat card usage and compromises from on-us and off-us locations. In addition, look for repeat terminal usage from foreign cards that is outside the set threshold. To accomplish this means adopting real-time capabilities that make you radically quicker at detecting and responding to suspicious and irregular transactions. And now I'll move on to our second use case. Now let's talk about jackpotting. One morning, a customer or branch employee doing a review reports apparent tampering of an ATM. Or perhaps a customer reports an ATM is out of service. Or perhaps operations detects a network problem with an ATM. But none of these in themselves are a guarantee of malicious activity. Regardless, by the time it is discovered, over $10,000 in cash is gone from ATMs. In this case, the banks did have defenses in place. The ATMs were built into the walls, and they had updated the operating systems to make them harder to tamper with. However, this was an off-premise retail ATM that lacked a high visibility location and closed circuit television monitoring, making it vulnerable to an attacker and giving them the time they need to work on the ATM. So how does jackpotting work? Jackpotting is a technique where cyber criminals use malware or a piece of hardware to trick an ATM into ejecting all of its cash. No stolen card required. At the most basic level, an ATM consists of a computer, safe, card reader, interface, and a network connection to the bank. The software on the ATM computer communicates with the customer and their card via the terminal interface and card reader. And the computer on the ATM communicates with the back-end banking system via the network. When the ATM computer receives authorization from the core banking system, it instructs the safe on when and how much money to dispense. All application and network activities performed by the ATM are recorded in an electronic journal, or EJ, that is also stored on the ATM. The electronic journal captures all ATM activity, such as transactions, cash-related events, settlement information, and hardware and software events, including error codes. So what happened? In this case, the attacker attacked after hours at a low visibility ATM. They punched a small hole in the ATM cabinet and accessed the USB port on the ATM computer. Using a USB stick, they loaded malware they purchased on the dark web to take control of the ATM computer, and then instructed the ATM to dispense cash, all without the need for a card. In addition to malware, jackpotting can be accomplished using a black box. A black box is simply an electronic device, such as a computer, tablet, mobile phone, or circuit board that replaces the ATM computer. Cybercriminals disconnect the computer ATM and connect the black box. They then use the black box to issue ATM commands. The act of physically disconnecting the cash dispenser from the ATM computer to connect the black box bypasses the need for attackers to use a card or get authorization to confirm transactions. As mentioned earlier, malware and black box attacks are no longer too complex for the average cybercriminal. Anyone with the required cash can purchase ATM malware and hardware from the dark web, including easy-to-follow instructions. However, there are several possible fingerprints of a jackpotting attack in progress. The ATM service or processes may stop running. The ATM may be unplugged from the network. The ATM dispenses cash without a card present. The dispenser or USB hub is unplugged and removed. A critical ATM service stops running. A directory containing critical software is altered or deleted. The cash dispenser puts out more than a certain number of notes in a short period of time. Or cash may dispense without an authorization for the transactions from the core banking system. Typically, in the case of a jackpotting attack, more than one of these is recorded. So how can you protect against jackpotting? The key is the electronic journal on the ATM, as it records all activity as it occurs. The data in the electronic journal is typically used for operational purposes, batch processes, and maintenance. However, it is possible to monitor the electronic journal and stream events being written to it to an ATM network-level fraud management system. By monitoring in real time when specific sensors or combinations of sensors are triggered on the ATM, and by correlating these to network traffic occurring in parallel, or the possible lack of network traffic, it is possible to detect the fingerprints of jackpotting and raise an immediate actionable alert. Real-time streaming and monitoring is all the more important as some malware and black box attacks have demonstrated the ability for cyber criminals to delete the electronic journal on the ATM after the jackpot is completed. And now for my final use case of the day. Case study 3, a transaction reversal fraud. Upon review of a number of cash out or cash low reports received earlier than expected, it is discovered that over $3,000 is missing from a number of ATMs without debits being recorded to any bank accounts. So how did this happen? How was this not detected? The bank was monitoring for transaction reversals exceeding specific thresholds and withdrawal amounts. And the bank also limited the number of repeat reversals of transactions an ATM can process. So what went wrong? Transaction reversal fraud is a form of ATM tampering. It involves a sequence of actions that create numerous error codes, resulting in a transaction reversal and the ability for the criminal to take cash before it is returned to the ATM safe. In transaction reversal fraud, funds in the bank accounts do not get debited even after executing multiple transactions. The account may not be debited, but the money is gone. To execute a transaction reversal fraud, the criminal performing the attack may open a new bank account with a fake name, or more likely, use an existing account of a legitimate cardholder from whom they have stolen a card or had a card issued as a result of identity theft. So how is the attack executed? The following provides an example on how transaction reversal fraud may be executed. A card and PIN are entered in the ATM. Both the card and PIN appear legitimate. A cash withdrawal is requested. The host certifies the transaction. Again, everything looks legitimate. The cash is pulled from the safe, ready to dispense. Prior to the cash being dispensed, the card is ejected to be returned to the cardholder. Instead of taking the card, the criminal waits and leaves it in the reader. The transaction then times out. The card reader tries to capture the card, but the criminal holds onto the card so it cannot be captured. This jams the ATM. The host will reverse the transaction, but the cash is not dispensed back to the safe. The criminal will then force open the cash dispenser shutter and steal the cash before the ATM puts money back into the reject bin within the cash dispenser. In this scenario, the fraudster avoided immediate detection by the monitoring systems that were in place by using stolen card information and fake cards for multiple accounts, by keeping each withdrawal to a low dollar value, and by using accounts across multiple ATMs. So how can you protect against transaction reversal fraud? As with the detection of jackpotting attacks, the key is monitoring the electronic journal on the ATM in real time. You heard in the description of a transaction reversal fraud attack that many sensors are triggered on the ATM, both for the transaction, card jamming, as well as sensors triggered for hardware events and errors relating to physical tampering. Again, by monitoring in real time, it is possible to detect transaction reversal fraud and generate an immediate actionable alert. When card data, electronic journal transaction data, hardware error data, and network data are all available together in real time, they can be correlated and processed by a hybrid rules-based and machine learning fraud system to generate a risk score. The rich set of data available from the ATM and network will generate a very clear fingerprint of transaction reversal fraud. The result is the generation of a high risk score that result in it being flagged for immediate attention. When it comes to analyzing data for fraud risk scoring, it's all about the quality of the data. To identify fraudulent transactions, man-in-the-middle attacks, jackpotting, and transaction reversal fraud with the highest degree of accuracy, and simultaneously minimize false positives, fraud detection and risk scoring systems need data to build a comprehensive model of expected behavior and identify anomalies in behavior that indicate fraud. Specifically, they require a broad data set. Whether evaluating ATM or card transactions, it is important to correlate and analyze payment and network data across the entire line of business, including ATM, POS, payment card issuance, and digital banking channels in a single view. When data is aggregated from multiple systems by different tools and applications, this results in a loss of fidelity as important data is altered from its original format or stripped of essential metadata. A deep data set is also required. Often fraud patterns are only detected by correlating multiple data points, as we've seen in the three scenarios I presented. It's critical to have access to all data associated with a transaction, from the ATM EJ to the approval host and back again. If these data aren't available to fraud detection and risk scoring systems, they can miss the smoking gun of a fraud event entirely, or misidentify it and generate a false positive. And finally, a timely data set is required. When it comes to fraud, milliseconds count. Identifying and alerting on ATM fraud in real time can be the difference between success or failure for a criminal. This completes the use cases I'm going to cover today, though there are many variations. The key points I'd like to leave you with for smashing cash outs are that real-time ATM network level fraud detection is your ally. Look to capture, decode, correlate, and analyze transaction data from every point in your network, independent of your back-end fraud systems. Ensure that ATM electronic journal data, including hardware errors and alerts, are part of the transaction data being captured, decoded, correlated, and analyzed. And real time matters. Criminals don't stick around. In Africa, 19 million disappeared in 3 hours. Detecting and blocking ATM fraud can't wait for fraud systems to correlate logs and perform analysis. Your team needs to know about suspicious activity the moment it happens. To look more closely at how real-time ATM network-level fraud detection enhances your fraud defenses, let's look at some standard fraud prevention measures that still run a risk of being compromised. Do message authentication code solutions stop cash-out schemes? Message authentication codes, or MACing solutions, add an additional layer of security by ensuring message integrity from the sender, the ATM, to the receiver, the financial switch or authorization host. But as we've seen, sometimes the fraudulent transactions never reach the authorization realm that would normally perform MAC verification. In the case of card not present transactions, MACing solutions offer little in the form of protection. Does transaction signing stop cash-out schemes? Similar to MACing, transaction signing may also fail to stop certain cash-out schemes. If the proxy switch or malware is in line, the transaction never reaches the real authorization realm, and approval response is provided to any transaction being routed to the transaction switch, rendering transaction signing irrelevant. Does malware management stop cash-out schemes? In the case of an attack launched against Cosmos Cooperative Bank in India, resulting in the loss of $13.5 million, many banks may be inclined to assume that a malware management tool will suffice in preventing this form of attack. This is not correct. Malware management tools will be one layer of defense against such an attack, but not the only one. These solutions can be compromised as well. Do EMV chip and PIN stop cash-out schemes? Another common layer of defense is an EMV chip and PIN. But if attackers are using terminals that allow fallback transactions, EMV chip and PIN will not be able to stop this kind of attack. In the case of man-in-the-middle malware, fraudulent fallback transactions would be intercepted and approved by the proxy switcher malware and would never reach the real transaction switcher backend, meaning the EMV check is never done. I've reached the end of today's presentation. In closing, I want to leave you with a summary of real-time alerts that flag potentially fraudulent ATM transactions. Look for missing back-end transactions that identify man-in-the-middle attacks. These are fake processes where a transaction enters the payment switch but never reaches the host for authorization due to switch malware or card compromise. Look for a rise in transaction declines, unexpected EMV fallbacks, consecutive magnetic stripe transactions, or reversal rates. Capture and monitor ATM status codes and response code errors in real time. Keep an eye out for suspicious repeat terminal usage. This could be triggered from foreign card traffic being outside set thresholds. Also monitor for high withdrawal velocity or abnormal numbers of high-value transactions. Flagging transactions based upon high volume, high amount, or unusual repeat card usage at the same terminal or across an unlikely geographical area is a strong indicator of ATM fraud. And finally, monitor for distance-based card fraud in real time. This is where there is implausible distance between transactions. Thank you again for attending Smashing Out Cash Outs. I'll be available shortly to answer questions, so please send them in the chat channel. You can also reach out to me directly at the contact information provided, and I'll be happy to chat further. Thanks again. Have a great day.